Rabbi Emeritus from Congregation Beth Shalom here in Bozeman. It's been a couple months now since you went on your trip?
December, yeah.
Yeah, December, Rabbi Ed got to go hang out with a Jesuit organization on the border, and so he is going to share with us this morning about that trip and what he saw and what he learned, and maybe put it in the context of Scripture, of the call to care for the migrant and sojourner, stranger, alien, depending on your translation. How else do you want me to introduce you?
That's great.
Okay, go ahead.
So thank you for having me. This is, I think, the 8th or 9th presentation. I've done this presentation in Bozeman now, and I've got a couple more scheduled. I want to preface it by saying there are 35 border crossings between the United States and Mexico. And one of the reasons it's hard to get a grasp on what's really going on and with people's lives and stuff is that what's happening in one is totally different than what's happening in another. And not only is it geographically diverse, but it's diverse in time. So the policies keep on changing. So what happened back in December is not necessarily what's happening right now. And the policies are applied differently at different borders. So some of the newer policies are being tried out at this border, but not at this border. So you'll see that there are some generalities we can make. And by the way, this is not intended as a political thing about the wall or anything like that, but really it's focused on real people's lives and what's going on with them there. So it all began when a group of 10 rabbis was invited to attend a week with the Kino Border Initiative, a Jesuit group. And normally they only take Catholics. However, this group of rabbis, we flew down to Phoenix in December. The large guy on the left was a rabbi who was the chaplain at Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit school. And as a result, he had an in with the Jesuits, and they said, we're going to try something new, and we're going to invite some rabbis. You know, we share, the Hebrew Bible 36 times says, you shall love the stranger. It's the most repeated and most important, probably, verse in the entire Bible. Jesus takes off on it and teaches it most prominently in the story of the Good Samaritan, but not only there. And so Charles had put out something on our listserv that we have room for 10 rabbis, and within an hour it was full and there was a waiting list. So we flew to Tucson. That's what, if you haven't been to Tucson, as soon as you get off the plane, that's what it looks like, a little different than Bozeman. And it was 71 degrees in the middle of December. This was just prior to Christmas. So I just want to say a word about the Kino Border Initiative so you know what it is, and it gives a little context. And this will be the only slide that has a lot of words on it. So their vision is the humane, just, workable migration between the U.S. and Mexico. Their mission is to promote the U.S.-Mexico border and immigration policies that affirm the dignity of the human person and a spirit of binational solidarity through direct humanitarian assistance with and accompanying of it with migrants, social and pastoral education with communities on both sides of the border, and participation in collaborative networks that engage in research and advocacy to transform local, regional, and national immigration policies. A lot of words, but we're going to make it simple as we go through this. This is our host, Father Pete. He had previously lived in El Salvador at a Jesuit mission there. One day he was out shopping, and gunmen came in and murdered all of the priests and nuns. And he just avoided it because he happened to be out shopping. He asked for a transfer after that, and he's been here in Nogales. So Tucson's about an hour from Nogales, so we drove the hour. So this next slide we're going to skip. It's a little video off of the Kino Border Initiative's website. You can go there if you're interested and see more about what they do. But essentially the point of the video asks you to imagine that you're a migrant, that you've left your home, left everything you have, your job, your neighbors, your land, And what you got now is what's on your back. Most of the migrants we met are families these days. I was saying earlier, we tend to think of migrants as men who are coming looking for work, and that was true in the 90s and even up until about 2005. And it's gradually transitioned to now, overwhelmingly, it's families. And we can talk about that a little more. But, so our work was in two main locations. So the Jesuit house itself, there's two Nogales. There's the American side and then there's the Mexican side. It used to be one community before they started building the walls, which, by the way, the wall there started under Bill Clinton and got expanded under Bush. So now it looks very different than it did. I was actually there 40 years ago, and you just walk back and forth between the two sides without any thought. So we stay on the American side, about a kilometer from the border, drove every morning to a gas station right at the border where we parked the car and walked across. And walking across into Mexico, no one checks any papers or anything. The other way around, coming back is a whole different story. And about maybe a quarter mile, no, less than that, probably just a few hundred yards on the other side, is the comedor that the Kino Border Initiative runs. The comedor literally in Spanish is like a food kitchen, a dining room, an eating place. And missionary sister of the Eucharist, Cecilia, runs the comedor. That's what it looks like up on the top. That's the outside. It looks like almost like a trailer. But we fed breakfast and lunch every day to probably 150 people at each meal. They're building another one right across the street now where they'll be able to accommodate a lot more people. And then we also spend time at the women's shelter. That's a little on the bottom there, which is a little ways from there. And we were told that we were there for three purposes. One is to humanize. In other words, to see who are these people as human beings. One was to accompany them, and I'll talk more about what that is. And the third is to complicate our own understanding of what's going on. And I've organized this presentation along those three principles, hoping that you also will see the humanity, feel what it's like to accompany, and also complicate your own understandings. So, before we begin with those three, I just want to say that we met three types of people. The first type are asylum seekers, by far and away the biggest group. So asylum is a right under international law and under United States law, where if your life is in danger for various reasons, you can seek asylum in another country. Actually, we see asylum in the Bible for different reasons. But the idea is that, and it's a right, and most of the people who are seeking to come to the United States now are asylum seekers. People who claim that their lives are in danger where they come from. When we were there, that particular week, almost all of the asylum seekers came from Guerrero, which is a province in the south of Mexico, which is where Acapulco is. But Acapulco is a nice tourist city and it's well protected by police and military. You get into the country in the province of Guerrero and the gangs run everything. And you'll hear more about in a little bit the gangs and how they operate and so on. But other weeks we were told that the migrants there who were seeking asylum were from Guatemala, Honduras. Most of those people from Guatemala and Honduras go to Tijuana. So it's a whole different situation there. But now more of them are coming this way over to Nogales because there's so many problems in Tijuana. And as I said at the start, it's very fluid. Things are constantly changing. That's the first group. The second group are deportees. These are people who have been here illegally many times since they're children. And the United States rounds them up and deports them. And they take them and they put them on a bus and drive the bus to the border. They get out. They're wearing handcuffs and shackles, and they undo the handcuffs and the shackles, and they walk. And usually, the first place they come is to the comedor, which is just a few hundred yards from there. We'll hear more about them. And then the third group are those who are planning to cross the desert illegally. Now, they never announced that, so we don't know who they are, but we know they're there because there are some people who are crossing illegally. And we'll talk more about those three groups as we go along. So we're going to begin with human eyes. Some stories. There are 1,000 stories like this I could tell you, and each one is different, but they've got some overriding kind of similarities. This is the Avilad family. Mr. Avilad lived in South Carolina, where he worked as a plumber for 14 years. He had been here illegally. As back in the 90s especially, most migrants were men who'd come looking for work. He was one. And it was very easy to do that. So after 14 years working as a plumber, ICE raided his business one day. He worked for some big construction company, and they arrested all the people who were there illegally. They put him in jail, in a jail about a few hours away from where his family was. His children, there are 5 of them, 4 in that picture, are all American citizens. They were all born in America. The jail was very far from the home, so the family couldn't afford to visit him, and then he was deported. The family decided we don't want to be separated from our father, and they all went to live in Mexico, which it happened to be Guerrero, this province in the south, which is where he'd come from. And the violence started. There were threats made against the lives of his children if he didn't basically give them everything he had. That's how the gangs operate. They demand money or whatever property you have, and if you don't give it to them, they'll threaten to kill your children or your family, and in many cases do. And so they were at the border again seeking asylum. The sad thing is, you don't want to tell them. We're there to kind of listen and to serve. But what I know, and I don't share with them, is he has no chance of getting asylum. About 1% of Mexicans who apply for asylum actually get it. That little better if you're Honduran or Guatemalan, 3 or 4%. If you're Chinese, it's 81%. Anyway, so this is the Avila family. All the children spoke perfect English, although they would only speak Spanish to me. And just a sweet, sweet family. This is Ana Maria. Ana Maria is a very typical situation. She came to the United States as a little girl. She'd been here 40 years, illegally. Her parents brought her. And she worked at Walmart in Tucson. A job came open as supervisor, and she applied. And there were 2 finalists, her and another woman. Ana Maria thought she would get the job because she was bilingual and the other woman wasn't. The other woman got word somehow that Ana Maria was illegal, called ICE, and she was deported. Something that's very critical about Ana Maria's story, which is a very typical story. I'm sure you've all read about family separations. And we normally think about family separations as a policy where people who are coming over, the children were taken from the family. And that happens, and there's a good many of them. But that's nothing compared to the family separations that happen with people like Ana Maria. So Ana Maria, being here 40 years, she has children. She has 3 grown children. They all live in Tucson. They're all American citizens. But their mother was taken and put in Mexico. And so she stays at a border town like Nogales, as most of them do, so that her family can come visit with just an hour's drive. Very often the family doesn't want to come into Mexico because even though they're U.S. citizens, they're afraid that they might not be let back. And you can see them on the weekends particularly meeting like through the fence. It looks like a jailhouse visit. There are thousands and thousands of these separations where it's the adult who's separated from, or the mother or the father. And it's so sad. She's a grandmother now, and she loves to cook, and she'd love to share her recipes and her cooking with her grandchildren, but doesn't really have that opportunity. And she can't go back to the United States because once you've been deported, you can't get back in. That's a typical story of the kind of family separations that are the main things that we're seeing. This is Rosa. By the way, Anna Maria and Rosa, both of them were living in Nogales and had a job, and they volunteered at the Comedor. They weren't, so they were not like most of the people we met. I was actually working alongside them, and because they really understand the plight of the migrant, having been deported themselves, and they stay at the border because that way that's the only way they could stay close to their, reasonably close to their families. Rosa came as a little girl. She was 3 or 4, and by the way, I forgot to say, Anna Maria spent a year in jail before she was deported, because after she was arrested, she was charged with identity theft for using a fake social security number for over 30 years as she worked at Walmart. Rosa's story is totally different. She came as a little girl. She was here 16 years, no, she was 16, so she was here 13 years or so, and her parents went through an acrimonious divorce, a nasty, nasty divorce. Her father, after the divorce, decided to go back to Mexico, and he told everybody that his wife and daughter are dead. I mean, it was one of these, they just don't get, you maybe know people who've been through divorces like this, that's very hateful. And after he got back to Mexico, and he heard his wife and daughter were doing well, he called ICE and reported them. And they were deported. She actually cried as she told me, my father tells everybody that I'm dead. So this is Fernando and Paulino. That's what the border looks like. Actually, that's the American side. On the left, you can see perhaps all the cars on the Mexicans coming the other direction. As I said, going into Mexico is a piece of cake. You just drive right through or walk through. Coming back, the reason we walked across is because if you come back in a vehicle, you wait for hours to get through. Nogales is the busiest of all of the border crossings because it's where the great majority of the fruits and vegetables that come into the United States in the winter come from. When I was a kid, maybe some of you remember, in the winter, if you wanted fruits and vegetables, you had your choice. You could get canned or you could get frozen. But now people in Wisconsin want fresh watermelon in the winter, and the result is trucks lined up as far as the eye can see, bringing this stuff in. And there are warehouses just on the American side. All the big supermarket chains have their warehouse. So trucks come and they'll pull into the Albertsons warehouse, and then trucks take the stuff out to everywhere in the United States. And this is where most of our fruits and vegetables come from in the winter in the United States. So it's very, very busy. And this is a little aside, that's where most of the drugs come in. I know Senator Daines recently spoke about drugs coming in and coming to Montana, and 80% of them come in at this border crossing on these fruit and vegetable trucks. Right now they search about 1/3 of them, and even then, there's so many ways to hide drugs. I mean, you can hollow out watermelons. I mean, you can't, what are they going to do? Kind of make a hole in every watermelon, you know? And so it's very difficult to apprehend, but also the drug dealers know that they only have a 1 in 3 chance of even being searched. So, that means 2 in 3 are not searched. If you play baseball and you get on base 2 out of 3 times, that's pretty darn good. Anyway, 3 to 5 times every day, a bus comes through this way. It's a big white bus, and you can actually see it from the Comedor. And as I said earlier, the people get off. They're handcuffed and shackled, and they're wearing prison garb. Because before you're deported, you're in prison. It may be only a couple of days, or it may be for years. So they're still wearing their prison garb. Most people know if you're deported, they take off your handcuffs, and there you are, they set you free, but now you're on the other side of the border. Most people know that you've got to get rid of that prison garb, because the gangs in Nogales, they look for these people and will kidnap them. And they'll take your cell phone. They may not have anything, but they usually have a cell phone. And they'll take your cell phone and start calling your contacts and tell them that we're going to kill him unless you give us money. That the prison closed. And one of the things that I actually did was work in a clothes closet. You'll see, giving these people clothes so that they could change into. The comedor was much, much more, as you're going to see, than just a food kitchen. So they had been here, they'd been deported, an hour before this or less. And they were telling me about their circumstances. One had just been in jail a few days, they'd met in jail. The other one had been in jail for several years. He didn't say why. He had probably committed some crime. So everybody told us stories about fleeing violence. These two men here, so here are some of the rabbis listening to this story. Of the 10 of us, I think 4 or 5 of us spoke Spanish, a couple of 3, spoke some Spanglish, and the rest we translated for. But these two men, so frequently after the meals, people would hang around and tell their stories. These two men both came from Guerrero but didn't know one another. The man on the right was had a fruit stand. He sold fruit. And the gangs demanded all of his money and profits and fruit. And when he said no, or couldn't give him enough, I'm not clear which, they killed his son. The man on the left had a similar story. He was a farmer, and the gangs demanded his produce and his parts of his land, and when he wouldn't give it to them, they killed his father. And they look pretty tame here, but in fact, as they told us their story, they were both in tears about the losses. So this man was just somebody in limbo. So he had been deported, he'd gotten to know, and he had nowhere to go. He had no family, he had no, he'd been there 2 months and just kind of coming to the comedor every day. And he'd been working in the United States as a laborer for some period of time. And so there's a number of people who are just in this state of limbo that they don't know where to go or what to do. And our job was to listen to their stories. Very pastoral kind of work. So in the comedor, there was a large screen like you would see at an airport, or actually kind of like this. And there was a lot of information that was, it would go from screen to screen, giving people information about what they may need. And one of the things was to convince people who might be thinking about crossing illegally not to do it because of how dangerous it is. So this particular, there must have been 15 or 20 rotating screens. I just happened to catch these two. Delitos más frecuente en el camino, the crimes that happen most often if you try to cross illegally, and there goes 1.4% are abuse of authority, 81.9% robbery, 3.1% extortion, 2.7% kidnapping, and 4% assault. So one of the things we got to do was some teaching. In this particular slide, it was right after the meal. Rabbi Olivia on the left in the pink was role-playing a migrant who had come into the United States and had fallen and broken her leg. And she was seeking medical attention. Charles on the far right was role-playing a American border person and telling her, sorry, you're here illegally. You have no right to medical care, your problem. And I was the judge hearing their case. And so they both made their pitches, and I actually, the reason I'm smiling is because the guy in the red jacket, little hoodie over there, I appointed him to be the lawyer I told him he was the lawyer for Rabbi Olivia and make her case for her. And he did, and then I finally ruled and I explained that she is a very good lawyer, and that you have a right to medical care under international law. And it's a human right, and we taught about how you would assert that right and be sure you can get medical care if you're injured along the way. So there was a lot of teaching we did, and this is just one example. So besides us, there was another organization there that's loosely affiliated with the Unitarian Church called No More Deaths. And here, so on the left over here, are Ed and Priscilla, who were volunteers at No More Deaths, and they were the cell phone gurus. So I mentioned how they'll take your cell phone, and so what they do is they'll, not all these people are so technologically adept, and they'll show you how to erase all your contacts, so that they can't, if they do take your, if the gangs take your cell phone, they can't extort you. And then you could use their cell phones to call your family and friends and tell them you're here and so on. Rick over here, he had a very interesting job. When you're in the American prison and before they release you, they give you $50. The government gives, most of the prisons are private prisons. The government gives them $50 to then give to the people who are released so that you have some cash in your pocket. But the $50 comes either, depending on which prison, in the form of a check or a debit card. The check is not negotiable in Mexico. And the debit card requires a PIN, but they don't give you the PIN. And so if you never cash your $50, the prison gets to keep it. So Rick over there is some kind of computer guy. And he helps you cash your check, or most often to get the PIN. He knows how to get the PINs on the debit cards. Now you can cash your check on the street for about $15 on your 50 on the black market. But you wouldn't think of facing these kind of problems. But these are the very practical problems that these people have to deal with. Is you got $50 to your name, but you can't get it because you don't have the PIN. So there is a glasses place, and there's no eye doctor or anything like that. There's just like hundreds of pairs of glasses of all sorts, and you try one on until you see better. And that's your glasses. There's a nurse that comes periodically. Here she was treating a man, and that's the clothes closet that I mentioned, where we got people clothes. And I had various jobs while I was there. So I mentioned that we humanized, we also accompanied. Here are our rabbis sorting frijoles. We serve a lot of frijoles. If you know, when they come in bulk, there's like little rocks mixed in, so you have to get the rocks out. Through No More Deaths, there was a couple there. They were professors at an Iowa university, and every time they had off, they'd come down there and volunteer. And this guy made really delicious frijoles. Tortillas. Rabbi Ethan here, you can't see it in the photos, but he said he was a juggler, and all the kids were on this side watching, having a good time. So part of it was just sort of being with folks and just giving them something to look upon other than their dire circumstances. So prayer is really big in the Comidot. These people are all Catholics, overwhelmingly. We were asked to lead prayer for most of the meals that we were there. Some of our rabbis took it a bit too seriously and thought they were delivering a high holiday sermon. It was kind of like, all right, let's eat already. Come on, Charles, that's enough. We were introduced, they didn't know what a rabbi was except from the New Testament, when Jesus is called a rabbi. And so the word in Spanish for rabbi is rabbino, if that's what I would be. Rabbi is, they know, is only Jesus. That's not the word you would call a modern day rabbi, right? So that's the only word they knew, so they thought we were somehow associated with Jesus, which gave us a lot of credibility. So we were asked to lead prayer. I'm going to see if this works here. This one has got sound. I'm not quite sure how to do this. Yeah.
Manorah.
There's a verse in the Hebrew Bible. Manorah hamakom hazeh.
Manorah.
And we were teaching it here. It's what Jacob says after the ladder, dream on the ladder. He says, God was in this place and we did not know it. And I did not know it, right? Manorah hamakom hazeh. And that was how we felt about the Komidot. That God was in this place and and we didn't know it. And so in this particular clip, we're teaching it to the staff. It was sort of between the meals. But later we taught it to, if you've never seen 150 migrants chanting in Hebrew, it's something to see. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir were not, but that's Father Pete. So one of the things Sister Cecilia said as she introduced us, which really touched me, and I have it here translated for you. She said, these rabbis are here to be with you so that you know people out there care and you're not alone on this journey. At first I was really reluctant about going. I thought, you know, it's going to cost me money for a plane ticket and this and that. Maybe I should just give that money to the Kino Border Initiative.
Gracias.
Rather than
Gracias.
spend it on, rather than gratifying myself by feeling important by going. It was when she said this that I realized it was important that I went. That not only listening to the stories, but letting them know that there are people out there who care, just by being present. Didn't matter what we did, just to be present. Turned out to be a really valuable lesson. And then, of course, the other part that turned out to be really valuable is being able to bring it back and share it with you. Moving to the women's shelter, this was Maggie, so it was women and children, facing similar but also some different issues there. We brought gifts. I had brought pads and crayons and markers and stuff. And the kids, like Maggie, just sort of ate it right up, and she started drawing right away. She was actually a pretty good artist. So this is Lucera. So Lucera's is also a typical but atypical story. When you come to the border to seek asylum, you take a number, like at the Motor Vehicle Bureau when you go for your license or something. And it can be anywhere between a week and several months before your number gets called. So they do have some shelters, and fortunately there were enough shelters where people would stay, and every day they'd come to the border and check on what number they're up to. One of the things that the current administration has done is really cut down the number of people that get processed each day. So there are 300 people, as of last week, there were 300 people waiting, 300 families waiting for their number to be called, and they were processing 3 to 4 a day. So Lucera's family came back, it's almost a year ago now, that they came to the border to seek asylum. They got their number, and every day they were fleeing violence in Guerrero, and they had horrible stories about the violence that they had seen and faced and feared. The gangs would go into the school and threaten the children if the parents didn't pay money and stuff like that. So they got to the border, took their number, and every day checked, and it took about 3 months before the number was called. In that 3 months, Lucera turned 18. She had an older brother, 3 younger siblings, and her parents and her. So when their number finally came up and they presented themselves for asylum, they said, well, you're 3 families. Because the brother is 19, she's 18, that's 2 families, and then the parents with the children count as 1 family. And so we have 3 separate asylum applications. But they didn't make them take new numbers. They did treat them, they proceeded with each one. So her brother, you make your application, and you have to assert a credible claim of fear, which doesn't require much at that stage. And then you're admitted into the United States. Most of the time, if you don't have children, minor children, you're put in prison waiting for your asylum hearing, which could take years. Her brother was sent to a prison in Colorado, and she was sent to a prison outside of Tucson. I don't know why they were, maybe it's age, gender, whatever. The parents, so this was one of the reasons that the family separation policy, where they take children away, came about in this current administration, is because up until that point, and when they were at the border, this was before the family separation policy, if you had minor children, they couldn't separate the minor children from the parents, and so you were allowed to enter and given a court date, and they went, so the parents with the 3 minor children went to Fresno, where the dad had a brother, and they were able to live in Fresno, and they still are, pending their court hearing, which will take 3 to 5 years. So that's another big problem in the system, is that there's not enough immigration judges, so it takes years and years for your case to be heard. And by that time, you've developed equities, right? By that time, maybe they'll have another child who's now an American citizen. He'll have a job. They might own a home. The kids will be in school. And 5 years later, it seems really harsh at that point, because they will be deported. They're going to lose their case. In the meanwhile, to get back to the Sarah, she spent 6 months in this prison in Tucson, a private prison. She described it as a living hell. She said there were worms in all the food, which I think she meant maggots, because other people, lots of other women reported the same thing in the food. And she said, there was no cup to drink. If you wanted to get water, you had to drink out of the sink and stuff like this. Anyway, 6 months later, she lost her claim. Of course, they all do. And she was deported. So she's now 18 years old. She arrives in Nogales in handcuffs and shackles. They let her out. Her parents are in Fresno with the 3 minor kids. Her brother was still, for whatever reason, his case was taking a lot longer, and he was in Colorado. And she's all alone. She can't go back to Guerrero where they were threatened. So she's staying at the women's shelter. She arrived 3 or 4 days before this photo. And you're allowed to stay there 7 days. They'll give you a second 7 days if you really need it, and then she'll be turned out. And she's a prime candidate, obviously, for sex traffickers. And that's her story. It's a unique story because it happened when she happened to turn 18, or else she would have been with her parents in Fresno. And, in that month, in those months she was waiting at the border. It's also a difference. It would be very different today, because today the parents would have also been in jail, and they would have taken the kids and sent them to a kids' prison. What's been described as cages. You'll see those in a minute. But not at every border crossing. So that may be at some border crossings and not at others. Now, one of the things the new administration has announced is that for asylum seekers, you can come to the border and seek asylum, but you're going to have to wait in Mexico. So the 3 to 5 years, you'll have to wait in Mexico. They're only actually doing that at one border station currently, and it's not in Nogales. So that's been announced as a new policy, but they're just trying it out at one station. And it looks like a court is going to rule that illegal. So that's another thing that keeps on happening, is the courts intervene and they say you can't do it this way. And so, like, what's true one day is not true the next day, and what's true at one border station is not true at another border station. It's very confusing. The little boy in between Lucera and one of the rabbis there, he was there with his mother, and he told, so in Mexico, a very common art form is the ballad, the singing. And he sung a ballad that he had written that brought us all to tears, about how his father would beat his mother, and showed up one day with another woman and another little boy, and said that this is his son now, you're no longer my son. And that was his ballad that he wrote. I actually see the camps where they put the children, because they're in Texas. But they happened to be in the news the same time we were there, so I included this. Right there you see the line of kids. When they turn 18 and they happen to be in the kids' prisons, they march them into the adult prisons. And that was what was happening on that day. A bunch of 18-year-olds. So the last part I want to talk about is complicated. And one of the things we spent a couple of days on was Father Pete took us out into the desert, generally in the areas that migrants would try to cross. So there are this border wall there, but if anybody who wants to get over it, it's very easy to get over. All you need is a ladder. And now that they got barbed wire on it, you have to bring a saddle. You put that on top and you go over. Or you can go far enough into the desert where there's no border wall, and you can go through over there. On the right, you see a poster that was hanging in the comedor. And it says, no vayas there, don't go. No hay suficiente agua, there's not enough water. No vale la pena, no, it's not worth the trouble. And you can see the concentric circles. The first one is 1 day walking, 2 days walking, 3 days walking. It's a minimum of 3, for many people 5 days of crossing desert to get to do this journey. The red dots are people the 6 months before this where they found bodies of people who tried to cross. There are any number of things that can kill you. Lack of water is one of the big ones, but you'll see there are many others. Anyway, this particular section we were on actually had a trail. Most of it you have to bushwhack. There's no trails. So, as some of you may know, Catholics are big into relics. And Father Pete collected things that he found from migrants in the desert and considered them holy relics. So again, things you would never think about. For example, you'll see like a black Clorox bottle. So you've got to carry 8 or 10 of these, those bottles, if you're going to try to make it. And that's just for you, and if you're a family, that means you got to carry them for the kids too. So it's about 45 pounds of water per person. They sell these bottles painted black. Anybody want to guess why black?
Can't see them.
Close. So the U.S. has detection stations out there that look for reflections. And so if you have a non-black bottle, it will reflect and give away your location. There's also moccasins on your left, on the left there, so you don't leave footprints. All sorts of other stuff like that that you wouldn't think of that you need. Here were some of the relics we found. The black bottles are everywhere because if you got to carry 5, 6, 8 of them, whatever, you're just going to discard them as you use them. Lots of Bibles with favorite verses inscribed or family stuff that I guess they decided was too heavy to carry. Moccasins, a baby bottle. Anybody want to guess what that is in the middle up on the top? Women would know it better. What? The metal thing up on the top.
Oh, it's an eyelash curler.
Eyelash curler, great.
Yeah.
So you find lots of cosmetics. You find perfume, cologne, eyelash curlers. Why? You think these people are just vain? No. If you arrive safely in Tucson and you smell like you've been in the desert and look like you've been in the desert for 5 days, they're going to pick you up in 5 minutes. So the last thing they do is a lot of personal hygiene towards the end of their journey if they make it. And you've got to be prepared for that. So the journey's difficult. On the one hand, it's hard to carry enough water. On the other hand, if you know anything about the desert, there are flash floods. And so, for example, on the left, looks like a safe place to walk because it's not full of brush. But there are places that have walls 6 or 8 feet on either side, and in 5 minutes they could be filled with water. And that's one of the chief ways that people die. They're called arroyos. This is kind of what most of the desert around where we were looks like. It's just bramble and sharp cactuses and stuff like that. And this is a tip on your, you see in the middle there, Babakaveri Peak, which is a native name. And that's how you navigate. You keep that on your left, and you know you're going north. On your right is a portable border station, and I don't know exactly how they work, but they have high-tech stuff on them. They fly drones out and all sorts of stuff like that, and they're looking for people who are crossing illegally. This one happens to be where there's a road, but usually they're out in the middle of the desert. So the water could be too much water or not enough water. People from No More Deaths leave water out for migrants in places like that. Just recently, 4 of the No More Deaths people were convicted in federal court of actually of illegal littering by leaving water out. The border guards, when they see this, some of them will pour the water out, but others are quite sympathetic to the migrants and will not, even though they're supposed to. The wall. So this is in the town, and the Mexicans decorate the wall with usually a lot of slogans about liberty and that sort of things. It looks very different in different sections. Just a mile or so down, we saw an American high school girls gymnastics team, and they were hopping the wall just back and forth as sort of just for fun. A wall is really easy to get over if you were determined. A few weeks before we were there in December, so November, you'll recall, was election, and when the president ordered troops to the border, and mostly what they did is install this razor wire to make it more difficult to get over, but also to make it look like a military zone. And this is, since I got back, they've now, it now looks like this, the whole town. This is the American side. Now here, in this particular place, it's just it's right by the crossing itself. But if you go just a little further, there are houses, American houses, that are about from here to that wall from the fence. So this is now your backyard. So the people who live there and the local government officials are just irate. They say kids play there, a ball goes in there, a dog goes in there. Who's going to pay for the emergency care for blah, blah, blah. It's universally down there really disliked. And now they feel like they're living in a military zone. Jose Elena Rodriguez was a Mexican boy who was apparently throwing rocks over that fence. You can't exactly tell here, but it's about 15 or 20 feet of a wall straight up, and then another 10 to 15 feet of fence. And he was tossing rocks over the fence, and a border guard shot 16 times, 12 bullets hitting him. While we were there, that trial happened, and the border guard was tried for manslaughter and found not guilty. He said he felt like his life was in danger from these rocks that were coming over this very tall fence. And our last day was spent in Tucson, in the federal courthouse, where we watched deportation proceedings. And it's called Operation Streamline, and they bring up massive numbers of people at the same time. And what happens is, in the morning, they're given a lawyer who comes in and gets them to sign a plea agreement that says you plead guilty to entering the U.S. illegally, and you'll be deported right after that. And the judge goes and says, Mr. Smith, is this what you want to do? Mrs. Smith, is this what you want to do? Blah, blah. And of course, you've got no real choice. And so you're sentenced to however many days you've been in jail, and then you're deported. And it's just mass justice. So this happens to be a couple of protesters out there and Operation Streamline. I want to end with this, which was the group that went right after us. Was a group of high school kids, a Catholic high school in Arizona. And this article appeared in the Arizona Republic. I'm just going to read the very end of the article. So they went and they did the same kind of things we did, more appropriate for high school students. And as they were coming back, it says, it was getting dark when Neely, that's Father Pete, led the students back across the border into the U.S., leaving behind the food kitchen. Before getting on the bus, Neely asked the students to stand in a circle, hold hands, and mention the names of some of the people they'd met. One by one, the students called out different names. Jamie, Gabriel, Jose, Noel, Victor, Alejandro. Neely then said a prayer asking God to give them the strength to tell the stories that we received today, to take them home to our families and school, so that others may share in this gift we have received. On the bus ride back to Phoenix, some of the students couldn't stop talking about some of the migrants they had met, especially the family with the 5-year-old girl. They talked about feeling overwhelmed walking in the Comedor for the first time and seeing the room packed with so many migrants who had been recently deported. Luke Ogden, and this was the one that really touched me, a 15-year-old sophomore from Scottsdale, said that this was his second trip to work at the Comedor. The first time in August was so emotional, he wanted to come back. Before visiting the Commodore, Odin said, quote, I was like completely conservative, like build the wall, and like they gotta get citizenship, they gotta wait it out. But going over there and seeing, I mean, these are humans, the dangers and the pressures that are on them to get to America and their families. And it goes on with some of the other kids, similar comments, and I was particularly struck because this was happening the same time of the kid with the MAGA hat in DC, and also from a Catholic high school, and which turned out to be a big crazy thing anyway. But so these kids from these Catholic high schools come down there with these ideas of build the wall and so on, and the experience of actually meeting these people, of humanizing, of accompanying, of complicating, changes perspectives. And so I was so thankful for the opportunity to go, and even more thankful for the opportunity to share these stories with you. There's 1,000 more. No, tens of thousands more. They're similar, but they're different. And human beings. And I hope I've avoided the political, because there's a lot to be said about that too. And just tried to share with you some of what's really going on just in this one little corner of our world. Thanks.